The stars strayed past the viewport as the diplomatic vessel cut through the darkness of space. Captain Jinho Park stood alone in the observation deck, his hand resting on the old pocket watch in his jacket. The metal felt warm against his palm as it always did. His grandfather had given it to him 40 years ago on his deathbed with words that never made sense until now. Keep it safe, the old man had whispered. When you reach the stars, you'll know what to do. Jinho had reached the stars. He had commanded warships and explored distant worlds, but he still didn't know what his grandfather meant. The watch was just an antique, wasn't it? A relic from Earth's past before humanity learned to travel between worlds. Captain, a voice broke his thoughts. Lieutenant Myra Choi entered the observation deck carrying a data pad. Her young face looked tired. She had been studying Valerian culture for weeks without rest. Dr. Hyan wants to see you. He says it's urgent. Jinho nodded and followed her through the ship's corridors. The vessel was small compared to military ships carrying only 20 people. This mission needed diplomats, not soldiers, though. Commander Taeyang Shin and his security team came anyway, just in case. They found Dr. Hun Kim in the research lab, surrounded by holographic displays. The old scholar looked excited, which was unusual. Dr. Hun rarely showed emotion about anything. Captain, look at this. Dr. Hyan gestured at a display showing ancient symbols. I was reviewing historical records about the Valerians. Most files are standard diplomatic reports, but I found something buried. The archive, it's corrupted, barely readable, but it mentions contact between humans and Valerians thousands of years ago. That's impossible, Jinho said. We only achieved faster than light travel 200 years ago. Before that, we never left our solar system. I know. Han pulled up another image. The file mentioned something called a covenant token, an object that proved friendship between our species, but the data is too damaged to read more. Myra leaned closer to the display. Could it be a mistake? Maybe the translation is wrong. I thought so too, Dr. Hun admitted, until I saw these symbols. He pointed at the strange markings in the corrupted file. Then he turned to Jinho. Captain, may I see your grandfather's watch? Jinho felt a chill run down his spine. Slowly he pulled the watch from his pocket and handed it over. Dr. Hyan opened it, carefully examining the engravings. Inside the cover, the scholar's hands began to shake. These markings, he whispered, they're the same exactly. The same as the ones in the corrupted file. The three of them stared at the watch in silence. The engravings had always been there, decorative patterns that Jinho never questioned, but now, under the lab's bright lights, they looked different, purposeful, meaningful. What does this mean? Myra asked. I don't know yet, Dr. Hun said, but I think this watch might be important to our mission. The Valerian Queen has rejected every human ambassador for 50 years. She considers us a young race, barely worth her attention. But if this watch connects to their history somehow, Jinho took the watch back, closing it carefully. Can you research more before we arrive? I'll try, but most files about ancient Valerian history are restricted. We won't have access until we reach their home world. Commander Taeyang entered the lab, his tall frame filling the doorway. Captain, we're approaching Valerian space. They've sent a patrol ship to escort us. Very formal, very cold. Expected, Jinho said. They are an LT Unk and GT doing us a favor by even allowing this. Meeting Taeyang frowned. Sir, I don't. Like this, Ambassador Bora's last report said the Queen barely spoke to her delegation. They waited 3 weeks for a 10-minute audience, then got rejected. This feels like a waste of time, maybe. Jinho agreed. But it's the only chance we have. Humanity needs this trade agreement. The Valerian sovereignty controls routes to 36 star systems. Without their cooperation, we're isolated. The ship shuddered slightly as it dropped out of faster than light speed. Through the viewport, a massive blue planet appeared, surrounded by orbital stations and defense platforms. Velcaros Prime, the Valerian throne world. Meyer gasped. It's beautiful. It was. The planet gleamed like a jewel, its surface covered in crystal structures that caught the light of its sun. The largest structure was visible even from orbit, a massive spire that stretched from the surface into space itself. The crystal spire, Dr. Hun said quietly. The Queen's palace. It's over 10,000 years old. 10,000 years. Humanity's oldest cities were barely 7,000 years old. The Valerians had been traveling the stars since before humans invented writing. A communication came through. The Valerian escort ship gave them approach coordinates in a language that sounded like music and thunder mixed together. Myra responded in careful Valerian, her pronunciation perfect. As they descended toward the planet, Jinho found himself touching the watch again. His grandfather's final words echoed in his mind. When you reach the stars, you'll know what to do. He was at the stars now, approaching a meeting that could change humanity's future, but he still didn't know what to do with the watch. Should he mention it to the Queen? Would she even care about a human antique? The ship entered the atmosphere and the crystal spire grew larger. It was magnificent, impossible, a structure that defied physics, and somewhere inside it waited a queen who had rejected humanity over and over. Jinho made a decision. He would keep the watch close. He would watch for any sign that it mattered, and if the moment came, if his grandfather's words finally made sense, he would be ready. The ship landed on a platform near the spire's base. Through the viewport, Jinho saw Valerian officials waiting, their bioluminescent skin glowing softly in the evening light. They looked patient, ancient, and completely uninterested in the human visitors. This was going to be difficult, but humanity had survived ice ages, wars, plagues, and the vast loneliness of space. They could survive this too. All right, Jinho said to his team, let's go meet a queen. Crystal Spire was even more impressive. From inside, Jinho and his team walked through corridors that seemed carved from solid diamond, though Dr. Hun insisted it was something else entirely, a material that didn't exist on Earth. Light moved through the walls like living things, casting rainbow patterns on the floor. Their Valerian guide said nothing as she led them deeper into the structure. Her skin glowed with soft purple light, and her eyes were completely black like pools of ink. She was beautiful in an alien way that made Jinho uncomfortable. Everything about this place reminded him that humans were very, very young. Compared to these people, they passed other Valerians in the corridors. All of them stopped and stared at the human delegation. Some looked curious, most looked dismissive. One elderly Valerian made a gesture that Myra whispered was extremely rude. They really don't like us, Taeyang muttered. Can you blame Them, Dr. Hun replied quietly. From their perspective, we're an LT Unk and GT children. Playing with dangerous toys, they've been spacefaring for 10,000 years. We've had faster than light travel for 200. Finally, they reached a large chamber where other diplomats waited. Most were from species Jinho recognized. From the galactic database, the Koran delegation looked like walking trees. The Pendari resembled birds made of metal, and in the corner, looking exhausted, stood Ambassador Bora Nam. Jinho approached her immediately. Bora had been on Velcaro's Prime for 3 years trying to establish human relations with minimal success. Captain Park, she said, shaking his hand. Her grip was weak. I wish I could say I'm happy to see you, but this is probably a waste of your time. The Queen won't listen. She never does. What can you tell me about her? Bora sighed. Queen Empress Scylla has ruled for over 3,000 years. She's ancient, powerful, and absolutely convinced that young races have nothing to offer the galaxy. She grants audiences out of tradition, not interest. Every human ambassador has been dismissed within minutes. Why does she hate us specifically? I don't think it's hate, Bora said carefully. It's more like indifference. To her, we're insects, briefly alive, quickly forgot. She's seen species rise and fall. Why should humanity be different? A deep sound echoed through the chamber. Like a bell made of crystal, all conversation stopped. The Valyrian guide spoke in her musical language, and Mir translated in a whisper. The Queen Empress will now receive the delegations. They filed into an even larger room, the throne room. Jinho had seen impressive places before, but nothing compared to this. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into darkness. The walls were covered in what looked like stars, thousands of points of light that might have been decorations or might have been windows to actual space, and at the far end, on a throne carved from a single massive crystal, sat Queen Empress Scylla. She was smaller than Jinho expected. Her skin glowed with silver light, brighter than any other Valerian he had seen. She wore robes that seemed made of liquid starlight. Her face was ageless, beautiful and terrible at the same time, but her eyes were the most striking feature. They were deep blue, ancient beyond measure, and utterly cold. The delegations approached one by one. The Koran ambassador presented a gift, some kind of rare plant. The Queen accepted it with a nod. The Pendari offered a trade agreement. The Queen's advisor, a tall Valerian with red markings named High Vizier Kaelman, reviewed it and whispered to her. She made a gesture, and the Pendari left, looking pleased. Then it was humanity's turn. Jinho stepped forward with Meyer beside him. Dr. Hun and Taeying remained behind as protocol demanded. Jinho knelt. As they had practiced, Meyer spoke the formal greeting in Valyrian, her voice steady. The Queen looked at them with those ancient eyes. When she spoke, her voice was like music played on instruments humans had never invented. Meyer translated. The Queen Empress acknowledges your presence. You may state your purpose. Jinho stood. Your Majesty, humanity requests a trade agreement with the Valyrian sovereignty. We offer resources, technology, exchanges, and friendship between our peoples. The translation took a moment. The Queen's expression never changed. She replied in Valyrian, but then added something else, something in a different language. It sounded older, rougher, like rocks grinding together. Meyer's face went pale. Captain, she's speaking. I don't know what that is. It's not any Valyrian dialect I studied, Dr. Hun stepped forward, forgetting protocol. Your Majesty, could you repeat that? The Queen's eyes focused on Dr. Hun. She spoke again in the strange language. Slower this time. Dr. Hun and LT Unk and GT's hands shook as he pulled out his data pad, recording every sound. What is she saying? Jinho asked. I'm not sure, Doctor. Hyun whispered, but it sounds like proto-human languages, languages that died out thousands of years ago. Why would she know them? The Queen watched them with something that might have been interest. Then her eyes moved to Jinho's jacket, specifically to the pocket where the watch rested. For just a moment, less than a second, her cold expression changed. Jinho couldn't read what the expression meant, but it was something. Then the moment passed. The Queen spoke in normal Valyrian, and Meyer translated. Humanity has made this request before. The answer remains unchanged. You are too young, too unstable, too brief. The Valyrian sovereignty does not waste resources on species that may not survive their next century. You are dismissed. High Vizier Kailaman smiled, clearly pleased. The Queen Empress is merciful. She grants you 3 days to remain on Velcro and LT Unk and GT's Prime as guests. If you can present something of true worth, she will hear you again. If not, you will return to your space and not return for 50 years. 3 days. Jinho and LT Unk and GT's heart sank. What could they possibly offer in 3 days that would matter to a civilization this old? As they left the throne room, Jinho felt the Queen's eyes on his back, or more specifically, on his pocket where the watch waited. He touched it without thinking, and when he glanced back, the Queen was no longer looking at him. She was speaking to Kelman, her face cold and unreadable. Once more back in their assigned quarters, the team gathered in silence. I'm sorry, she said. It's always like that. She makes you feel like nothing. She spoke in proto-human languages, Dr. Hun said, still staring at his recordings. Languages that died out 12,000 years ago. How is that possible? And she looked at my watch, Jinho added. I'm sure of it. Meyer sat down heavily. 3 days? What can we do in 3 days? Jinho pulled out the pocket watch and placed it on the table under the room's lights. The engraving seemed to glow faintly. Everyone stared at it. We figure out what this is, Jinho said, and why a 3,000-year-old queen might care about it. Dr. Hyun picked up the watch carefully, like it might explode. I'll need access to their historical archives, and I'll need to work fast. And do it, Jinho ordered. Taeyang, go with him, keep him safe. As the team dispersed to their tasks, Jinho stood by the window, looking out at the alien city below. Somewhere in this massive spire, the Queen sat on her throne, ancient and cold, but for just a moment she had looked at his watch with an expression that wasn't cold at all. His grandfather's words came back to him again. When you reach the stars, you'll know what to do. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to understand. Dr. Hun didn't sleep that night. Jinho found him in their quarters at dawn, surrounded by holographic displays and looking like he had seen a ghost. Captain, the scholar said, his voice shaking, you need to see this. Jinho sat down as Dr. Hyun pulled up files on the main display. I managed to access some of the Valyrian public archives. Most of their ancient history is Restricted, but I found fragments. Stories, legends, things they teach. They're children, and I found something that matches the symbols on your watch. The display showed an image of the watch's engravings next to ancient Valyrian text. They were identical. What does it mean? Jinho asked. I spent all night translating. Dr. Hyun said it's a map, Captain, but not a map of space. It's a map of time, and it leads to something called the Old Covenant. He pulled up another file, this one showing Earth, but it was Earth from long ago. Covered in ice, 12,000 years ago. Earth was in an ice age. Humans existed, but we were primitive. We lived in small tribes, hunting and gathering, barely surviving. According to these Valyrian records, something happened during that time, something they don't talk about anymore. What happened? Dr. Hun's hands moved across the controls, pulling up more fragments. A Valyrian ship crashed on Earth. They were fleeing from something, a war maybe. The records are unclear, but they crashed in what is now Korea during the worst winter of the ice age. They should have died. Jinho leaned forward. But they didn't. No, because a tribe of humans found them. These primitive humans who barely had fire and tools, who were struggling to survive themselves. They helped the Valyrians, gave them shelter, shared their food, protected them from predators and other tribes, kept them alive through that terrible winter. The scholar's voice grew softer. The Valyrians stayed with that tribe for 2 years, waiting for rescue. They called it the Blood Covenant. They promised that when humanity reached the stars, the Valyrians would remember. They would treat humans as equals, as brothers, because humans had shown them kindness when they had nothing to gain from it. Jinho felt his heart racing. The Covenant token. Yes, the Valyrian commander gave her personal seal to the human leader, a token to prove the Covenant. When the time came, that token was passed down through generations, parent to child, for 12,000 years. Your watch, Captain, your watch is that seal. The room fell silent. Jinho picked up the watch, feeling its weight differently now. This small object had been carried by his ancestors for 12,000 years, through ice ages and wars, through the rise and fall of civilizations, through humanity's journey from primitive tribes to space travel. All waiting for this moment. Why doesn't anyone know about this? Jinho asked. Why isn't this in our history books? Because it's not in our history, Dr. Hun explained. It's in our prehistory. 12,000 years ago, humans didn't have writing. We passed down stories orally, and most of those stories were lost. Your family somehow kept the token safe, but the story behind it was probably forgotten thousands of years ago. Your grandfather probably didn't even know what it really was. Meyer entered the room, followed by Taeyang. They both looked worried. Captain, we have a problem, Taeyang said. I've been monitoring communications. Someone in the Valyrian court is watching us very carefully. I think they know we're researching their ancient history. High Vizier Kyle Mann added, I've been studying court politics. He's powerful and very traditional. If the Old Covenant became public, it would change everything. The Valyrians claim they're superior to younger races. But if they owed humanity a debt of honor, if they promised to treat us as equals 12,000 years ago, it would undermine their entire political system. Dr. Hyun finished. That's probably why the Covenant was forgotten, maybe deliberately erased. The Valyrian civil war happened 8,000 years ago, I think. That's when records of the Covenant were destroyed. Jinho stood and walked to the window. The alien city stretched out below. Beautiful and ancient, somewhere in this spire the queen sat on her throne. Queen who was over 3,000 years old. How old was the queen during the Valyrian Civil War? He asked Dr. Hun. Checked his data, she would have been young then, maybe a few hundred years. Old, not yet in power, but old enough to know about the Covenant, Jinho said quietly. Old enough to remember if it was real. He turned back to his team. She looked at my watch. She spoke in ancient human languages she knows, the queen knows what this is, but she said nothing. Meyer pointed out, why would she stay silent if she knows about the Covenant? Maybe she can't speak without proof. Dr. Hun suggested, if the Covenant was officially erased from history, she can't just declare it real, not without evidence. She needs someone to present the token. Oh. Taeyang crossed his arms. This is dangerous, Captain. If Kaleman and his faction suppressed this information before, they'll do it again. If you present that watch publicly, you're making enemies of very powerful people. And if I present it privately, Jinho asked, then it might be confiscated and disappear forever, just like the rest of the evidence did. Jinho looked at his team. Meyer, brilliant and young, her whole career ahead of her. Dr. Hun, old and wise, driven by the pursuit of truth. Taeyang, loyal and protective, worried about everyone's safety. And Bora, who had spent 3 years on this world, being ignored and dismissed. What do we do? Bora asked. We have 2 more days. The queen expects us to present something of worth. Jinho held up the watch, letting it catch the light. We present this, but we do it right. We need to understand exactly what it is and what it proves. Dr. Hyun, can you translate the engravings completely? I can try, but I'll need more time and more access to restricted archives. Then we get you that access. Meyer, use your diplomatic credentials. Push every boundary you can. Taeyang, keep us safe but stay quiet. We can't let Khan know what we're planning until it's too late for him to stop us. As his team moved to their tasks, Jinho remained by the window, holding the watch. 12,000 years ago, his ancestors had saved alien lives for no reward, just because it was the right thing to do. They had kept faith with a promise they probably didn't even understand. Passing this token down through 300 generations, now it was his turn to honor that faith, to take this ancient proof before an ancient queen and demand she remember. It was terrifying. It was impossible, but his grandfather had known this moment would come. When you reach the stars, you'll know what to do. Jinho finally understood. He would present the token. He would make the queen remember, and either humanity would gain an ally that could change everything, or he would fail and doom humanity's chances for another 50 years. There was no middle ground. There was no safe choice. He closed the watch and put it back in his pocket over his heart, where it had rested for so long. 2 more days until his audience with the queen. 2 more days to prepare for the most important moment in human history. He just hoped it would be enough. The 3rd day arrived too quickly. Jinho stood before his mirror, adjusting his formal uniform. The watch rested in his pocket, heavier than ever. Dr. Hyun had worked without sleep for 2 days, translating every symbol, every marking. Now Jinho knew what the watch truly was. and the weight of that knowledge pressed down on him like gravity. Are you sure about this? Meyer asked. She stood behind him, her own formal robes perfectly arranged, but her hands were shaking. No, Jinho admitted, but we're an LT Unk and GT doing it anyway. The throne room was more crowded than before. Other delegations filled the space, all waiting for their chance to address the Queen. High Vizier Kelman stood beside the throne, his red markings glowing brightly. He looked pleased with himself. Queen Empress Silva sat on her crystal throne, her silver skin glowing softly. Her face showed nothing, no emotion, no interest, nothing. She was a statue, carved from living light. One by one, delegations approached. A species Jinho didn't recognize offered advanced weapons technology. The Queen declined with a gesture. The Koran returned with a better gift than before. The Queen accepted, but offered nothing in return. Finally, a Valerian official called for the human delegation. Jinho and LT Unk and GT's heart hammered in his chest as he walked forward. Meyer walked beside him. Dr. Hun and Taeyang followed behind, carrying the formal trade documents that humanity had prepared. They knelt. Myra spoke the greeting in perfect Valerian. Jinho stood when permitted. Your Majesty, he began, humanity thanks you for granting us this audience. We come before you with a proposal for trade and cooperation between our peoples. Taeyang stepped forward with the documents. They were impressive, full of resource charts and technology exchanges carefully prepared by Earth's best diplomats over months of work. High Vizier Kelman took the documents and barely glanced at them. Before setting them aside, he whispered to the Queen. She listened, then spoke in Valerian. Meyer translated her voice. Tight. The Queen Empress finds your offer insufficient. Humanity has nothing the Valerian sovereignty needs. Your audience is concluded. Those conclude. This was it, the moment of rejection they had expected, the moment Jinho had planned. For he should have knelt, should have accepted the dismissal, should have left quietly like every other human ambassador before him. Instead he spoke. Your Majesty, I have one more thing to present. The entire throne room went silent. Sileman's face darkened. The audience is over, human. You will leave now. But Jinho kept his eyes on the Queen. I believe I have something that belongs to you, something that was lost a very long time ago. For the first time, the Queen's expression changed. Just slightly, just for a moment. Her ancient eyes focused fully on Jinho, and he felt like she was looking through him, seeing every generation of his family stretching back to the beginning of time. Speak, she said. Her voice was soft but carried through the entire chamber. Jinho reached into his pocket and pulled out the watch. In the throne room's light, it seemed to glow. He walked forward, ignoring Kelman's protests, ignoring the guards who moved to stop him, ignoring everything except the Queen and the token in his hand. Dr. Hyan had taught him the words, ancient words in a language that shouldn't exist, words that had been dead for 12,000 years. Jinho spoke them carefully, clearly. I return what was given, so what was promised may be remembered. The throne room erupted. Chaos. Kyle Man shouted orders. Guards rushed forward. Other delegations backed away in confusion. But Jinho kept walking until he reached the throne and held out the watch. Queen Empress Silva raised one hand and everything stopped. The guards froze, the shouting ceased. In the sudden silence she stood from her throne for the first time. She was taller than Jinho expected. She descended the steps slowly, her eyes never leaving the watch. When she reached him, she held out her hand. Jinho placed the watch in her palm. Queen's hands were shaking. She opened the watch, saw the engravings inside, and a sound escaped her lips. Not a word, just a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. She looked at Jinho, and for the first time since he had met her, he saw emotion in those ancient eyes. Tears, silver and glowing, ran down her face. She whispered so softly that only Jinho could hear, "You must be the last human who knows this." Then she closed the watch and held it against her chest. When she spoke again, her voice carried through the chamber, strong and clear. "Clear the throne room, everyone except the human delegation will leave now." Quote. Kael'man stepped forward. "Your Majesty, this is highly irregular." Leave, the single word carried such power that Kael'man actually stumbled backward. He bowed and left, though his face was filled with fury. The other delegations filed out quickly. The guards followed. Soon only Jinho's team and the queen remained in the vast chamber. Scylla sat down, not on her throne, but on the steps leading up to it. She looked smaller suddenly, less like an empress and more like a person carrying an impossible weight. "Do you know what this is?" she asked Jinho, holding up the watch. "I know what Dr. Hun translated, Your Majesty. It's a covenant token, proof of a promise made 12,000 years ago. It's an LT Unk and GT more than that." The queen's voice was heavy with emotion. "It's my personal seal. The seal I wore as a young officer when my ship crashed on your world." She looked up at Jinho. "I was there. I gave this to a human named Ko, who saved my life." Jinho's knees felt weak. "You were there." "I was young then, only 200 years old. I was serving on a transport ship, fleeing from a civil war. We crashed during your world's ice age in a frozen wasteland. We should have died in days. But humans found us." Her voice grew softer. "They were primitive by our standards. They barely had tools or fire. They were struggling to survive themselves. But they took us in. They shared their food, even though it meant they would have less. They protected us from predators, even though it put them in danger. Human named Ko, your ancestor, gave me his own shelter during the worst storms." The queen stood and walked to a window. "We lived with that tribe for 2 years. I learned their language. I hunted with them. I helped their children. Ko's daughter called me sister. When my people finally came to rescue us, I couldn't leave without making a promise. The blood covenant. When humanity reached the stars, we would remember what they did. We would treat them as equals." "What happened?" Meyer asked quietly. "Why was it forgotten?" "The civil war lasted for centuries," Silvira said. "When it finally ended, the new government wanted to erase certain parts of history, including promises made to primitive species. Most records of the covenant were destroyed. I was ordered to say nothing about it. I obeyed because I had to, but I kept watching Earth, waiting for humanity to reach the stars, hoping that somehow the bloodline had survived, that someone still carried the token." She turned back to Jinho. "But decades passed, then centuries. Humans reached the stars, but no one came with proof. I began to think the line had died out, or that humans had forgotten." Clear's throat. "Every time an ambassador came from Earth, I looked for some sign. Some hint that they knew. Jinho felt the weight of 12,000 years pressing down on him. My grandfather gave me the watch on his deathbed. He told me I would know what to do when I reach the stars. I don't think he understood what it was. The story was lost generations ago, but my family kept it safe. Anyway, that the Queen said is the most human thing I've ever heard, keeping a promise you don't even remember making, honoring a covenant you don't understand. This is why I made that promise 12,000 years ago, because humans, for all their flaws, understand honor in a way that transcends time. She looked at the watch. Again, her expression soft. What do you want, Captain Jinho Park? You've proven the covenant is real. What do you ask of me? Jinho thought about it. He thought about humanity struggling to find its place among ancient species. He thought about his crew who had risked everything to be here. He thought about his ancestors keeping faith across 300 generations. I ask that you remember, Your Majesty. Remember your promise. Remember that once, when you needed help, humans gave it freely, and now that we need friends among the stars, you'll honor that debt. The Queen smiled for the first time. It transformed her face, made her look young despite her 3,000 years. Then I will remember, she said, and I will do more than that. I will make sure the entire galaxy remembers. The next morning, Queen Empress Scylla called an emergency session of the Valerian High Council. Jinho and his team were summoned to attend. As they walked through the crystal spire, they could feel the tension in the air. Valerian officials whispered in corners. Guards stood at extra attention. Something was about to happen. The council chamber was massive, with seats arranged in circles around a central platform. Hundreds of Valerian officials filled the space, their bioluminescent skin creating a sea of colored lights. High Vizier Kale Man sat in a place of honor, his expression dark. The Queen entered, and everyone stood. She walked to the central platform and raised the pocket watch high for all to see. Members of the High Council, she began, her voice echoing through the chamber. I stand before you today to reveal a truth that has been hidden for 8,000 years, a truth that some of you know and have chosen to forget, a truth that I have kept silent about for too long. Kyle Man stood. Your Majesty, I must protest. Whatever you're about to say, sit down, Kyleman. The Queen's voice was still. You will hear this. The Hazier sat, but his markings glowed bright red with anger. Silera continued. 12,000 years ago, during the Civil War that nearly destroyed our species, transport ship crashed on a primitive world. That ship carried 37 Valerians, including me. We crashed during an ice age on a world you now know as Earth, the human home world. Murmurs spread through the council. Many officials looked shocked. Others looked angry. A few looked frightened. We should have died there, the Queen said, but we were found by humans, primitive humans who barely had fire and tools. They were struggling to survive themselves, but they took us in. They shared their food. They gave us shelter. They protected us through 2 winters until our people came to rescue us. She held up the watch again. In gratitude, I made a promise to those humans, the blood covenant. I gave them my personal seal and swore that when their species reached the stars, we would remember them. We would treat them as equals, as brothers, because they showed us kindness when they had nothing to gain. This is madness. Ka Man stood again, his voice shaking. Your Majesty. Even if this story is true, it was 12,000 years ago. Those humans are long dead. We owe nothing to their descendants. Honor is not limited by time, the Queen replied. A debt is a debt, a promise is a promise, and this token proves it. She gestured to Jinho. Captain Jinho Park carries the seal I gave to his ancestor. His family kept it safe for 12,000 years, 300 generations. Even after they forgot what it meant, they kept faith with a promise they didn't understand. Can we do any less? A female council member stood. But Your Majesty, acknowledging this covenant would change our entire relationship with humanity. It would undermine our position as the elder race. It would make us appear weak. It would make us appear honorable. Scylla corrected. What is weakness? Admitting we owed a debt to primitive species who saved our lives, or hiding that debt because we're too proud to acknowledge it. She looked around the chamber. During the Civil War, records of the covenant were destroyed. It was decided that we would forget this promise. I accepted that decision because I was young and had no power, but I have waited 3,000 years for a human to come with proof. Kyle Mann's face darkened. If you acknowledge this covenant, Your Majesty, you acknowledge that humans are our equals. You give them access to our technology, our trade routes, our protection. You elevate a species that has existed in space for barely 2 centuries to the same level as the Valyrian sovereignty. The other races will see this as weakness. Let them, the Queen said. Simply, I cannot allow this. Kael'man gestured, and suddenly guards moved through the chamber, their weapons raised. Members of the council, the Queen Empress is clearly not thinking clearly. For the good of our sovereignty, I am invoking my authority as High Vizier too. He never finished. Taeyang moved faster than Jinho had ever seen, placing himself between the approaching guards and the human delegation. At the same moment, the Queen's personal guard entered the chamber, heavily armed and loyal only to her. You dare threaten me and my own council? I dare to save our sovereignty from your weakness. Command shouted. You would destroy everything we built because of sentimentality about primitive humans who showed you kindness 12,000 years ago. The council will support me. They know acknowledging this covenant is madness. For a moment the chamber held its breath. The council members looked at each other, uncertain. This was the moment Jinho realized, if the council sided with Kael'man, everything was lost. Meyer stepped forward. She shouldn't have. It wasn't her place, but she did anyway. Members of the council, she said, her voice clear in the tense silence. May I speak? The Queen nodded. Speak. Mir took a breath. I'm Lieutenant Meyer Choi, cultural attaché for the human delegation. I've studied your people for years. I know your history, your philosophy, your values, and I know that the Valyrian sovereignty was built on one principle above all others: honor that lasts. She looked around the chamber. Your civilization has survived for 10,000 years while others fell. Why? Because you keep your promises, because you honor your debts, because you believe that a civilization is measured not by its power but by its integrity. That's what makes you great, not your technology, not your military, your honor. She pointed at Kael'man. He asks you to break a promise because it's inconvenient. He asks you to dishonor a debt because the creditors are weak. He asks you to throw away the very thing that makes you Valerian, and he calls that strength. Meyer turned to the queen. 12,000 years ago, your majesty made a promise. She kept that promise alive in her heart for 3,000 years, even when she was forbidden to speak of it. She waited, she hoped. And when proof finally came, she honored her word. That is strength. That is what makes a civilization eternal. The chamber was silent. Then slowly one council member stood. Then another, then more. Within moments, half the council was standing, and their message was clear. Ka-man looked around in disbelief as his support crumbled. You're all fools, he spat. This will destroy us. No, the queen said quietly, it will save us because honor that lasts 12,000 years is not weakness. It's the strongest thing in the universe. She looked at her personal guard. Remove the High Vizier from this chamber. He will face judgment for attempting a coup. As Ka-man was led away, still shouting protests, the queen turned back to the council. I propose full alliance with humanity. Not just trade agreements, full alliance. We will share technology, open our space lanes, and offer our protection. In return, humanity will pledge friendship and cooperation with the Valerian sovereignty. One by one, the council members voted. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. The alliance was approved. Jinho felt like he was dreaming. Humanity had come asking for a simple trade agreement. They were leaving with a full alliance with one of the galaxy's most powerful empires. After the session ended, the queen returned the watch to Jinho. Keep it safe, she said. It belongs to your family, but more than that, it belongs to history. What you did here will change the galaxy. Other young races will see that honor and integrity matter more than power. You've shown them that keeping faith, even when you don't understand why, can move empires. What happens now, Gina asked. Now the queen smiled. Now the galaxy learns that humanity is under Valerian protection. The species that dismissed you as primitives will think twice. The empires that ignored you seek your friendship. Everything changes. 3 months later, Jinho stood in the palace gardens on Velcaro's Prime. He had returned for the official alliance signing ceremony. Earth was celebrating. Humanity's future among the stars was secure. The queen found him looking at a new monument in the garden. It showed 2 figures carved from crystal. One was clearly Valerian, young and injured. The other was human, primitive but standing strong, offering protection. Ko and young Scylla, the queen said, joining him, your ancestor and me. 12,000 years ago, I wanted to remember them properly. It's beautiful, Jinho said. Your ancestor kept his promise to protect my people, Scylla said softly. You kept yours to remember. That is why humans will endure among the stars, not because you're the strongest or the smartest, but because you understand that some debts transcend time. She placed a hand on the monument. I've lived for 3,000 years, Captain Park. I've seen empires rise and fall. I've watched species appear and disappear. But I never forgot those humans who saved me when they had every reason not to, and I never will. Jinho looked up at the alien sky where Earth was just one small star among billions. But humanity's place there was secure. Now, not through conquest or manipulation, but through honor kept across the ages. His grandfather had been right. When you reach the stars, you'll know what to do. He had reached the stars, and he had honored a promise so old that no one remembered making it, but it had been Enough, it would always be enough. Because that was what humans did. They kept their promises even when they forgot why. They honored their debts, even across 12,000 years, and they showed kindness to strangers, even when it cost them everything. That was humanity's strength. That was what would carry them to the stars and beyond, and in a garden on an alien world, carved in crystal and remembered forever, two figures stood together, one human, one Valyrian, proof that kindness given freely can echo through the ages and change the fate of worlds.